So good morning, everybody, and a warm welcome to our February OD Talk. Um, we usually share why we chose the topic that we did, and this one has an interesting story. Mbali, who is going to host most of today's session, who you'll meet in a minute, attended a networking event recently on alternative leadership paradigms. And she came back, and in our Friday team check-in meeting, she was telling us about how interesting this was and how the focus of the session was on Shaka Zulu's leadership styles. And how interesting she found it, and she shared some of the information and some of the stuff that she learned with us. And we thought, oh wow, fascinating. So that made us start jumping into reading about African leadership more and about doing some research. And because we at Worldsview Academy absolutely love everything about teams, we're always learning more about teams, working with teams. We do a lot of team development work. We then, in our research, found a bit of a link to how teams are formed, especially in the Shaka story as well. It was all about him having teams of warriors that works with him, and how does he motivate them, and how did he do it, and how was his leadership a positive or a negative influence on that. The other side of the topic today is team intelligence. Now, team intelligence is something that we started getting interested in a few years ago. We had an OD talk on the topic in 2022, where we explored the topic a bit more. We've written about it in our newsletter a few times. Our team development class, the skills class on how to develop teams. We look at team intelligence in that class as well. So in our research and in our excitement about this topic, or the two topics, we found a great link, and we thought, let's host an OD talk where we can really dive into this topic and get people to come and have conversations with us. So that is what we'll be doing today. The agenda for the hour and a half that we will be spending together today is we're going to start in true Worldsview fashion with a conversation. So we will soon put you into breakaway rooms. We will then bring you back. We won't be taking feedback immediately after the first breakaway. You'll be having some conversations. We'll then bring you back and share about 15 minutes of background and research with you that we've done about the topic, things that we found interesting, that we hope you find interesting as well. Then there will be another round of conversation after we've shared the research, and we will then go into some feedback to find out what each of the breakaway rooms have had to say and the conversations they've had around that. Right, so welcome. Mbali, I'm going to hand over to you to set us up for the first breakaway room. So Mbali, where are you?
Here we go. I was on mute. Thank you, Liesl. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you will enjoy today's OD talk and we'll get to hear some thoughts and some interesting stuff. Before we start and we deep dive into the research, as Liesl just mentioned now, we are going to start with getting into some breakaway rooms where we'll get to know each other and answer just one question. We would like for you to get into the breakaway rooms and answer question 2, because I know some of you have already started in the chat box. Now we'd like for you to share some examples of organizations or leaders that you've seen that do incorporate the traditional African leadership principles in their practices. So let's just take a minute to think by yourself, and then you will get an invitation on your screen to get into the rooms and meet some people. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed that brief discussion and heard some interesting things. And as much as I would love to hear everything that you talked about, we're not going to debrief this part, and we'll debrief the next one. So let's get into it. So before I take you through this very high-level summary of my findings, I would like to share with you why we decided to focus mainly on team intelligence and not just your IQ or EQ today. So what we've learned is that as tasks are becoming more complex and more complicated in the world we live in right now, the need for the use of teams keeps rising. So now organizations understand that diverse working groups together can achieve more, can find better solutions, and solve problems even more effectively. So generally, there's a stronger focus on teamwork to reach common goals across different industries. And as well as the fact that we work with teams on a daily basis with different clients. So it is important to have this discussion, as we do want intelligent teams, effective teams, high-performing teams. So in 2012, Google started a study where they were studying their teams all over the world. So initially, they thought that just gathering some smart people and putting them together would automatically create the best teams. But unfortunately, that wasn't true, obviously. They found that the who in the team didn't really matter when it comes to performance. Instead, they discovered that teams working together is what matters. So the actual team and as a collective is what impacts the performance. So they learned about group norms, which are unwritten rules that govern team behavior. So a significant part of the study showed that teams with good performance on one task usually did very well on other tasks as well, while those teams that failed at one thing tended to fail at everything. So this is what led them to exploring collective intelligence in their teams. Not that this didn't exist before, but this is when they decided to explore it further. So their findings indicated that group norms played a crucial role in team intelligence, and the right norms boosted team intelligence while the not so good ones hindered it, regardless of who are the people who make up these teams and how intelligent they are. So there's a lot of research on this topic of team intelligence. In some articles, they refer to it as collective intelligence or team intelligence, and in some as team synergy. So these are some of the definitions that I came across. I am not going to read all of them, but I'd like to highlight some important elements that I see when looking at them. So the first one being the fact that the team usually and most of the time will collectively outperform just one member of the team who may be deemed as the best performing team member. And the second one being the emphasis on finding more and better solutions with intelligent teams. And also the mobilization of skills, which is sharing resources to make a collective action possible, efficient, and more successful. Now, these definitions associate success with the group as a collective and not just individual members that make up the group. So that's the emphasis. So what everybody wants is effective teams, is high-performing teams, which led me to the question of how do we get there? So how do we develop effective teams? How do we develop high-performing teams? And then it led me to what type of culture supports that? What type of leadership is more likely to support this and get us to intelligent teams? Now, could it be the African leadership approach? So before I zoom in on African leadership, I would like to acknowledge that there are a lot of other leadership perspectives that exist that have really incredible principles that propelled leaders over the years, over decades, and just give them the props that they deserve. We have the Western leadership perspective, which is characterized by democratic principles, individualism, which encourages autonomy, and personal accountability, which is good principles, and they lead to significant growth and emphasis on entrepreneurship. And we also have the Asian leadership perspective, which is characterized by a collective vision, which gears people towards a common objective, fostering collaboration and synergy. And also a long-term perspective, which helps with strategic foresight, where brand building and customer relationships are very important in Asian leadership. But today, we're touring Africa. So as we do tour Africa, I would like to talk about some principles that are involved in traditional African leadership. So when I started working on this, I realized that there's so much written on this topic, particularly African traditional leadership. So different writers quote so many principles that are relevant, that do make sense. But for the purpose of today's conversation, I would like to focus just on a few, which is the concept of Ubuntu, consensus decision-making, eldership, storytelling, as well as adaptive leadership. So when we speak of the concept of Ubuntu, it's really based on the belief that anyone who has Ubuntu understands the value of human life and will use his or her abilities for the betterment of the common cause, for the betterment of the people. So Ubuntu teaches Africans love of oneself, love of others, and also respect. So it's the motivation to want to help the community around you in achieving communal goals, which leads to the common statement that you might have heard of umntu ngumntu ngabantu, which loosely translates to I am because we are, or a person can only be a person through others. And also phrases like an injury to one is an injury to another. So there's so many practical examples that I think of when I speak of Ubuntu. But just to not drag it, I would like to make one example of growing up in the Eastern Cape. There used to be this running joke or a stereotype about people who move into the cities. And when they get there, you don't know who's your neighbor in the suburbs because that's not how they live, which is something very strange when you grow up in the village, knowing everyone in the village and people having responsibility and depending on one another. For instance, if a parent comes across a kid in the street doing something wrong, they would reprimand them because they see them as their child. And you would also give that person respect because regardless of the fact that they're not your mom, but they are a parent, they are an elderly figure. So when it comes to consensus decision-making, which reflects mutual understanding and agreement to support a decision and commit to taking actions for the benefit of the group, ensuring group harmony and buy-in. In the olden days, you would find elders of the family having a meeting by the kraal outside, discussing pertinent issues, and everyone would be given a chance to speak before a decision is made, using also the guidelines of Lekgotla as we do in most of our team development interventions here at Wolfsview. Also, eldership. So in eldership, we value the wisdom and experience that comes with elders in families or in communities. So we believe that they are there to guide and advise on how things are done. Through their experience, they're able to tell us what works, what doesn't work by means of storytelling. So many people have beautiful stories that have incredible life lessons, stories that they were told by their grandparents, and some of these stories they are able to now relate to their own grandkids. So storytelling is one of the ways in which we preserve knowledge and instill values for the generations to come. And lastly, when it comes to adaptive leadership, this enables us to respond to changing environments with agility. And even today, if you just drive to rural villages, you'll be able to come across some sort of a makeshift bridge built by the community or young boys fixing potholes. Those are resilient communities that roll with the punches and face their challenges and not wait for some savior to come and fix their problems. Also, when it comes to making a call or a call for empathetic leaders when they need it, or it's time for command and control, it's easier for them to be able to rise to the occasion. So in most of these principles that I'm talking about, you can almost see servant leadership at play. Now, looking at all of that, how can we build team intelligence by taking from the African leadership playbook? So to me, the concept of Ubuntu helps with team synergy by building trust and interdependence among team members. And then when you look at it at consensus and team decision making, it helps with buy-in and commitment. It's easy for people to commit and see things through if they were part of the decisions that are made in the beginning. And also the concept of eldership, it goes hand in hand with coaching, I believe. So with this, we can leverage people's experiences to develop others and help the younger generations or new individuals in a team without people feeling like they're being replaced. Also, storytelling helps a lot with communication. This is where we create a culture of shared understanding and innovation, as well as knowledge transfer. And lastly, gravitating more towards adaptive leadership helps with flexibility and agility. The team stays innovative with heightened responsiveness, which is very important in the unpredictable world that we live in right now. So when I was doing my research, I also came across a professor, Professor Lisi Ngambi, who used to be a dean at UNISA. In one of her papers on African leadership, she says that servant leadership and emotional intelligence as a competence are merely traditional African modes of leadership recast in modern terminology. Because if you look at the above principles, they speak to servant leadership in so many ways and align with the goals of building team intelligence. So I thought it would be a great idea to share a little bit about how Shaka Zulu approached team intelligence. Not that I'm saying that's what he called it then, but today I see what he was trying to do. Like Liesl mentioned earlier on, this is one of the things that sparks the idea of today's topic. So there are so many principles that are also identified in Shaka Zulu's leadership, but I would like to, for today, focus on vision, servant leadership, and communal decision-making, as long as tradition. So for Shaka Zulu, having a solid vision was very important. Even more important to him was having loyal alliances with people who were willing to fight and die alongside him for the common cause. So he made sure that he had a strong team of believers and warriors, people who believed in the same vision as him. Now, when it comes to servant leadership and communal decision-making, This was also very important to him, and it was seen through his actions. One of a very good example of this is when Shaka was acknowledged for his achievements with a dozen of cattle. The first thing that he did was distributing the cows among his counterparts, and in the end, only taking one for himself, demonstrating how he was thinking not just for himself, but for others, which is selfless leadership. So looking at the importance of tradition and in building intelligent teams, Shaka also introduced a tradition where he encouraged his warriors to gather around a fire and share battle experiences, praising each other for how they fought in the field, and they'd be singing and dancing. So this ritual boosted the morale of the team, reinforcing the warriors' sense of belonging, and which also hyped them up and prepared them for the next battle. In the end, improving team synergy. So that's how Shaka did it. Now, how can we do this in our organizations or in our teams? So having understood a little bit about the African leadership paradigm, I would like to propose a few strategies that we can try in developing team intelligence. The first one being team development, which is something that we're already doing, well, most organizations. But we can improve and focus more on this by developing team intelligence through implementing programs that focus more on emotional intelligence, focusing more on conflict resolution and cross-cultural communication, as well as by creating psychological safety in our teams, which is something that I cannot stress enough. It's very important. We can start by fostering a culture of openness in our teams, where team members feel comfortable sharing ideas and providing feedback. And also emphasize the role of leaders in facilitating this and creating an environment that supports team intelligence and success overall. We can also start by leaning more onto servant leadership, where we encourage leaders to embody the African leadership principles: lead by example, lead with empathy and Ubuntu, and also foster a culture of collaboration and promote diversity and inclusion in our organizations, as well as in our teams. And lastly, by making continuous efforts in improving communication. We can do this by creating effective communication channels, coming up with transparent decision-making processes, encouraging information sharing through storytelling that we've talked about in the previous slide, and also employing the principles of Lekgotla, as Liesl also said a bit about it earlier on. And then now we get to the fun part where Liesl is going to put us into the discussion rooms, where we'll be discussing the questions on the screen. Then we will be back to have a conversation and take some feedback from the different rooms. I hope this did give a little bit of context and some background, and it did spark some thoughts. So please just take 2 minutes to think by yourself, and then an invitation will come on your screen where you'll be able to join a group and digest everything that you heard here and answer the questions on the screen. So the question that we would like for you to discuss in the discussion rooms is, what did you find interesting about what you heard in this little presentation? A fraction of what's out there about African leadership. And what opportunities do you see in integrating those principles into our organizations and teams? Is it something that's already happening already? Is there anything that we can take, anything that we absolutely should leave behind? So I hope you'll enjoy the discussions, and we'll debrief when we get back.